Welcome to the video where I changed the emergency brake cable on my 1990 Ford Bronco project vehicle. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to jack the back end of the vehicle up, put it on jack stands, and take the rear tires off. Then you're going to remove the drums. You can tell that these are brand new brakes, so this project will actually be a lot easier than it normally would be. So the first thing you're going to do after removing the drums is you're going to loosen up that tensioner. That whole mechanism that I'm messing with is the auto tensioner for the brakes to make sure that the brakes stay tensioned pretty much so constantly. So that little shiny metal tab that I removed is part of that auto tensioner. So I removed that, the spring, the tensioner, bolt, as well as the cable that runs that auto tensioner. The next thing I do is I pry the emergency brake cable arm forward. And then I reach in there with a pair of pliers and I just pry off the old emergency brake cable. At that point, the emergency brake cable is free, and the outer housing of the cable is still hooked in. So the little housing pushes through a hole in the back of the brake assembly, and there's four little tabs that expand. So what you have to do is either bend those tabs out of the way or close those tabs up so they'll fit back through that little bore. And here you can see that I'm doing that with a screwdriver. Once that fits out through the bore, the emergency brake cable just slides out. And here I'm sliding the new emergency brake cable through that hole. So what you have to do is once you've pushed it through the hole, you have to push it in really solid to make sure that those four little ears or little fingers actually snap out and lock into the plate on the back of the brakes. So here I'm putting the emergency brake cable back in the emergency brake arm, and then I'm pushing that spring back towards the back of the plate. You can see that a spring just fell off, but I'll be replacing that right here. Then it's time to put everything back together on the brake side. So what I do here is I hook the spring onto that auto tensioner flange, and you'll see that I pull that over, hook it into the large hole at the bottom of the brake shoe, and it snaps into place. Then what you need to do is put the cable on, and that hooks on the same ear that the spring does on that little tab, and then you can lift up on that tab and put the cable around the cable guide, and then you make sure everything's sort of is free and doesn't have any problems with any binding or anything. Then you see I just kind of tap the brakes in a little bit to make sure they're not spread out too much or caught on the little ears that hold them off the plate. And here you can see that I'm adjusting that tensioner. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see that auto tensioner working. So every time you hit the brakes when you're going in reverse, that auto tensioner will try to tighten up that screw a little bit more and tension those brakes out. So if the brakes need to be adjusted, it will automatically do it the next time you back out of a parking spot. So you want to adjust them so when you put your brake drum on, you can just barely feel a little bit of drag. Once that is done, now you can start taking off where the emergency brake cable's hooked to the frame, and also there's some that emergency brake cable is actually the guide for some wires that go over to the rear end, and you'll see that in a second. So I'm removing the screw from the frame, and here you can see that I'm removing a little hanger that holds on to the wiring as well as the emergency brake cable that goes up over the rear end. So I'm popping that off with a screwdriver, and then you'll see me taking off those little wire clips in just a second. There's 4 or 5 of them. They're pretty grungy. Sometimes they're broken, but it is important that you put all these back. I'm not going to show you putting these wire connectors back or the bolt on the frame because you pretty much so know how those go. But it is important that you hook them back on, even though I'm not showing that here. obviously in this view you can see that the drive shaft is removed from the rear end. I'm sort of in the middle of several projects while I'm recording this video, so you'll see there's some miscellaneous new parts and old parts on this vehicle. So here over on the driver's side frame, just in front of the rear tires, you'll find this mechanism that holds the emergency brake cables all together, and you'll see there's a left cable and a right cable, and this is I'm removing actually in this instance I'm removing both cables and replacing both cables. One of them was in good shape, one of them was kind of frozen up. So here there are still those 4 little fingers on this cable, so you have to bend those ears out of the way, and then they will just pop out of those holes. So then you'll see me reinstalling the other end of the cables. The one that's on the driver's side in this instance went to the bottom hole, and the one that was on the passenger side went to the top hole, but your vehicle might be different depending on the year. So here I'm just routing those cables and putting them back in their original holes. So now there is a like a sheet metal thing that you slide the cables in, and that has an adjusting rod plus another cable attachment on the front of it. So here you can see I'm trying to figure out how to stretch those cables forward to make it easier to hook the front cable in. And here I've got a screwdriver in a hole in the frame rail, and I'm pulling forward. And you can see that I'm trying with one hand to get that front cable in there, which was a little bit tricky, but it did go in there. Here I'm exercising the 2 rear cables to make sure everything is free. Then I'm putting on that spring, so that spring goes through the little hole in the bracket on the frame and then hooks to that little adjustment arm. And now you're going to see me tightening up that adjustment arm with a wrench. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to tighten this up enough that it starts to put tension on the cables that are going back to the brakes, but not so much that it's actually making those drag. And you'll see me using the emergency brake pedal in just a second, and you'll see that there's plenty of motion on it before the brakes actually engage. So I don't think there's a really good way of tensioning these up. If anybody knows, please put the comments in something in the comments. So here you can see that I'm making those move by hand. I'll put a link for these cables in the description below, and hopefully this helped you out. This can be a little bit of a tedious job because depending on where you are in the country, depends on how rusty your vehicle is. I'm lucky that this is in Arizona, so this vehicle is not very rusty. But anyways, thank you very much for watching this video with me, and hopefully it helps. Goodbye.